Everyone, as far as everyone consents to be streamed. I'd like to firstly congratulate to all 4 teams for breaking to the ESL Finals of the LSE Open 2022. I'd like to wish everyone the best of luck and a very good debate. And now, without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Prime Minister.
I can check that I'm audible. I'll also obviously turn on my video, but I want to make sure the audio base is fine. Cool. Still audible, still visible. Hopefully, cool. Let me know if that changes, please. I will turn off my camera if that's the case. POIs in the chat. Cool. Start in 3, 2, 1. When Picasso was a middle-aged man, he had intercourse with a minor. And thus, and although that happened, she's the one that is not remembered by history, and Picasso is the one that is being remembered because she couldn't leave behind a legacy whilst Picasso did. I think that the human desire to have a legacy leads us to forget and forgive the transgressions of people that should not be forgiven just because we value a thing that ends up harming other people that aren't able to permeate their legacy into society. How does this desire for legacy manifest? In several potential ways. Firstly, wanting to have a child because you want to leave your genes behind, some sort of biological legacy. 2, having a memorial or statue or a monument built to honor the things that you did for your society. Maintaining money in the family. A lot of people perceive material legacy as being a very efficient form of legacy having. Or for example, in terms of political or artistic career, wanting to be remembered for the things that you did and leaving your mark on society. All of that cliches. What's the alternative if we didn't have this, and how would this look like? Now, the legacy means building up to something, but crucially, it means focusing on how it will be perceived by other people, making sure it stays in society and focusing on the marketing point of it, right? How will the thing I do be remembered by society? How will other people react to it? How do I make sure it sticks? The alternative is building the NGO because you actively want to help the people. You want to invest your everyday life into helping the people because you care about the cause per se, not about how the majority people will react to the NGO you have built. Focusing on the activity or on the process, on creating music because you enjoy going through that music process, not because you want to be the prince, the prince of pop music, right? Maybe also focusing on results, but crucially, not focusing on how is it gonna look like, being okay with your project being erased or cancelled if it ends up hurting society and not clinging with your teeth to it because it's the only mark you're going to make on society. I'll take a bit later. Opposition say, no, but people aren't going to do great stuff. I think they're going to argue legacy and it makes us want to do good things. No, I think the legacy element adds on an extra layer that stops or harms the evolution of your project. It perverts your other incentives. For example, because you end up prioritizing this marketable and selfish element. For example, Bill and Melinda Gates and Jeff Bezos' wife would donate on either side of the house because this matters to them, as opposed to Jeff Bezos, who probably won't donate on either side of the house because he doesn't care. The difference stands on how they would donate in the absence of this legacy of madness, right? So instead of donating to the flashy, socially acceptable, hot charity, malaria, you could donate to a grave disease that only affects 0.001%, but inflicts great pain. The reason why people generally don't invest in those is because it doesn't grant them a legacy in the wide public eye, right? So not having this legacy incentive anymore would actually make people invest into things, into NGOs, for example, that actively help a cause based on what they care about, not on the general perceptions of things. I will take the clarification preferably from CO. If not all.
Yeah, you don't have any fear to define comparative. You have to analyze why it's likely that most of the people will invest their time to charity and want to help the community. I think it's extremely unlikely.
Yeah, we wanted to provide an alternative because we thought it would be nice to not only be negative about legacy, but that's easier for us if you just want us to shit on legacy. So, and I want to point out, people donating to things is the good option, right? Because legacy usually makes shittier people do far shittier things such as war generals, making sure they purge the city that they're meant to invade because their nation will remember them. Politicians doing a very shift change to echo energy and fucking up mining coast cities because they want to be remembered as the politician that helped modernize the nation. Or Elon Musk saying, I want to be remembered as the guy who went to space. I do not care if I have to overwork and underpay my workers if this gets me to space within my lifetime and allows me to be remembered. So crucially, the moment you prioritize this, you deprioritize the people that you use in the process, or the things that the collateral victims that you make, because you use this calculus of, is this going to be grander than the harm I'm inflicting? This is obviously problematic. What's the issue here? When it's a general human desire, right? When we have an inherent desire that people will recognize our legacy after we're done, it means that we also recognize other people's legacy, right? I want my legacy to be remembered, thus I recognize the legacy of other people. And this is a self-perpetuating mechanism, right? Because you allow, societally, we allow a lot of shit to slip under the carpet because we want the same things to be applied to us. Speak well of the dead, respect their legacy. This is a very problematic narrative, right? So one, we let them get away with terrible shit during their lifetime or after they're gone because they've left a legacy in literature. See thousands of writers that were shit, that were racist, that were xenophobic, that were the Holocaust deniers, and still they remain in the canon because they left an artistic legacy. This is problematic and they should not be allowed to continue. We let them be because they represent an idea. See the Picasso example, right? If the legacy of the victim is not as relevant as the legacy of the person inflicting the harm, we allow it to slide because the transgressions we are able to leave them behind. I will take CO.
Can legacies be bad? We believe that legacies could be good or bad.
Yeah, and I've tackled if legacies are good, see the donating bit, see if legacies are bad, see the work thing. Effect, it makes you be selfish and prioritize yourself to other people. There's likely to influence or you to pressure other people to follow your path to maintain your legacy. For example, force your child to take that family business or have your political successor undergo and follow the same political plan because you don't want their project to be moved to the side. So the agency of general people or vulnerable people decreases due to the lack of empathy or due to the legacy tendency overruling the empathy. Two, you're rather prone to acts that tap into the majority needs or preferences because the legacy is as big as how many people acknowledge it. Thus, you're more likely to do things that are terrible for minorities or for people that are less able to acknowledge your legacy. Lastly, even in like day-to-day cases, it leads to rash things done towards the end of your life if you feel like you haven't gone a legacy because you feel like you're a failure. Two, it leads to quick change in terms of political spectrum, for example, which is problematic, or aim unrealistically high and have great depression if you fail because you feel like you have not fulfilled your purpose as a human, or at least constantly worry throughout your life, anxiety, because you feel like you're not going to achieve what you're meant to achieve. Legacy is problematic to the vulnerable and also to the people hanging by it. OG.
I would like to thank the speaker very much for the speech, and now I would like to invite the first speaker for the opposition.
Am I clearly audible?
You are.
Okay. I will begin my speech. 3, 2, 1. I wanted to start with a lovely framing of people die twice, once when they die and once when their name dies. But I wanted to be important to know that this is our side of the debate and government can't try and turn it into their side of the debate because they don't have the fiat to define that this debate is about who I give my inheritance to. They have to analyze how the inherent human desire to leave a legacy manifests as only helping my kids and why without this human desire to leave a legacy, it is likely that people will bequeath their riches to strangers. Hamilton sings about legacy and sacrifices his wife's privacy in order to not be viewed as corrupt by future generations. Typically, people who want to leave a legacy prioritize large quantities of people. What I'm going to analyze for you in this debate is first first the impact on the self, how it gives the self purpose, goalposts to reach. Secondly, how legacies help our societies as a whole. So starting with the first point, it's important to understand that everyone leaves a legacy. My kids are also a legacy, as OG pointed out, but not in the very fact that they exist. They exist because I had unprotected sex, but in the fact that I gave them my values, I transfer them my inheritance, I invest in them as they grow. They will pass my lessons and idioms and stories about me on to their own kids. People choose what to do with their lives, and they're happy to leave a legacy in those fields specifically. All of my achievements in debate mean absolutely nothing to most of my friends, but they make me very happy because that is something that I choose as significant to me. A person who sets a world record in swimming will say, that is my legacy. This leads us to the second question of what legacy do I want to leave? Because for some reason, OG think that people's inherent desire is to leave a negative legacy. But I know that people who were, say, conservative in their time and try to prevent progress were not viewed by future progressive generation as good. No one hails Hitler. People in the future will necessarily be more progressive than they, well, some people hail Hitler, but most don't. Some people in the future will be more progressive. They will be more advanced, and they will appreciate those who brought about that progress and advancement. For example, when we look at who are the highest rated presidents of the past in the United States, it's Washington, Lincoln, the Roosevelts, and Truman, people who, even if they were in a party called Republican, were the progressive ones. I specifically also want to bet safely. That is, I want a legacy that will be seen as positive by people in future generations. If I can predict what they want, I will aim for that. If I can't, I'll just try to save lives or set records, land on the moon or invent something unique so that at least my name lives on and something that is generally viewed as positive. So why does the desire to leave a legacy lead me to invest in my life? First, it gives me long-term goals. Even if say, being a pillar of my community is hard and requires constant work, I know that when I die, my community will remember me as a pillar and I will be leaving some legacy. Even if going to study for 12 years how to be a doctor is very difficult, I know that that is required in order for me to do research into saving lives. Secondly, depression. Look, if life is about my pleasure and I'm suffering, there's no reason to keep living. People constantly say to themselves, hold on, but what would I be leaving behind? What will people remember me for? What impact did I leave on the world? I don't want to leave before I make that impact. Thirdly, I care about my own family deeply. This is true when I have a legacy. If I didn't care about my legacy, I wouldn't care about my grandkids. And the reason old people invest so much in their grandkids is that they see death at their doorstep and they want to think, when I die, I hope people will strongly remember me and not just my kids who are busy with their own kids. I want everyone to remember as much as possible. Fourth, note that all of this investment already makes me feel good. That is, we already have a positive impact on how people feel. Fulfilling goals or setting goalposts for myself and being able to fulfill them means that I just feel happy. I get dopamine boosts when I do them. Secondly, I'm not as fearful of death. I know that I will have left something behind. People, since they cannot imagine death, they cannot imagine not existing, hate the thought of not existing. And we solve that because they think, oh no, I will still exist in a sense. I will exist in as much a sense as Napoleon exists or Lincoln exists. These are people who exist in the world because they left a legacy. This gives me comfort. Now, why does the legacy specifically make me act and not just want to act? A, I fantasize and dream about it. I imagine myself being discussed. I put myself in the shoes of those people who are currently being discussed and idolized and in the media. And I think to myself, life is short. I don't want to waste it. The question is, on government side, I think I don't want to waste it on anything that doesn't give me immediate pleasure because I only have 80 years to live here and have pleasure. On opposition side, I don't want to waste my time on doing something that isn't impactful, that doesn't leave a legacy, that won't change the world in some way. So the bottom line here is people's greatest fear is dying. People's greatest struggle in life is finding meaning. And the desire to leave behind a legacy provides a solution to both of these and leads to people actively leaving a legacy. Before I explain why those legacies help societies, I'd love to take second half.
Okay, you completely rest on the premise that everyone is satisfied with their legacy. The same benefits can be achieved by just simply being hedonistic.
Okay, look, I think that in general, people tend towards happiness. That is, I won't try. If I set myself a goal that I have no way of reaching, then simply I will very quickly give up on it and set myself a different goal that I am capable of reaching. Plenty of people are very happy with their legacy being an entirely normal and average life because they think my son was the first one in my family to go to college. For example, it is still a legacy that they leave behind. So how do legacies help society? We divide legacies into three different types. The first is inventions. Take the example of Nikola Tesla. These take a ton of time. They might fail. If you can't patent them, then you're just giving something to the world. And oftentimes it's hard to prevent people from imitating your design like Bell did to Tesla. And you are solitary because no one else understands the nuances of struggling to create the first vaccine or invent dynamite. The second type after inventions is social movements. We think of MLK, Gandhi, but even Obama or anyone who wants to significantly change the nation they live in for the better. Thirdly, unique value I add to humanity. If I break a record in my field, if I'm creating a new piece of art, if I'm pushing human limits. At the highest degree, this is Neil Armstrong's small step for man. But at my personal degree, that is my son actually owning a house instead of only having to rent one. Now, so how do these legacies end up affecting societies? Firstly, in each generation, we have a fight to see who will be remembered by the next generations, because there is a limit to how many of them can be remembered. I need to not only invent, not only be a part of a social movement, not only add value to humanity, but be unique and significant in those if I want to succeed. We think that so many people wanting to become president is a good thing, because if they didn't, then they wouldn't invest all of the hard work they do in their activist movements. We think that this also looks at treatment of inheritance. We think that bequeathments, like we see in universities, where each classroom or building is dedicated to some rich person who died. The greatest example of this is the Nobel Prize, which is the bequeathment of Alfred Nobel. Remember me by studying around me. My money helps people in the future study. We think that the alternative to that is giving it just to people who were close to me during my life, which means that the wealth stays in the rich, which OG opposed. For all these reasons, oh.
I'd like to thank Speaker very much for a speech, and now I'd like to invite the second speaker for the government.
Hello, am I audible and visible? Okay, cool. You cannot let opening opposition win on the argumentation, long-term good, short-term bad, ergo opposition wins. Because like, we can also have long-term goals. We can also want to do big stuff in our lives. Like, right, okay, let's take debating competition, because I think that's the example most people are gonna play on, but there are more important stuff in life, right? Like maybe I want to do something very meaningful with my life because I want to help people, and that's something that makes me feel good. I can do it based on that intrinsic motivation that helping people, creating NGOs or solving world hunger feels good. What opposition needs to defend is why I should do it, and I should base myself on the idea that I do it to be remembered. That's the difference. Like, take government as the side that does the things, and take opposition as the side that does the marketing, because that's the difference between the two teams. Opposition defends the legacy and the story behind it. We can also support actually doing the stuff. Opposition didn't prove why we have more of an incentive to do things on their side of the house. I'm going to prove the exact opposite by, first of all, talking about like larger things. And I think opposition largely misses the reason why we were talking about charities and all of that stuff, because some people, and the most important actors in this debate, can do a lot of good for the world. They can provide the world with a lot of benefits in the form of like solving massive issues, creating NGOs, or doing good to the world. That's what my colleague was talking about. And we say that their goals are perverted by the goal of legacy. Because look, the argumentation from opening opposition goes like this. I set up long-term goals because I want people to think I was good. But we think that internal motivations and the rest of the motivations are significantly more important, because I can get a legacy in absolutely anything. I can be remembered as the guy who ate 40,000 bags of Cheetos, and that can be my legacy, or I can be remembered as the guy who solved world hunger. Both of those are legacies, right? But for me to be able to decide which one I actually want to pursue comes from internal motivations and the thing itself and how that thing makes me feel, right? So this already proves that internal motivation of the action itself is a lot more important in actually doing the action. This proves that most benefits like these are symmetrical, but more likely they are perverted on opposition when I have to push further in order for me to actually achieve a legacy. Like, we can have more reasons why it's already very important for us to have internal incentives, such as like, I immediately feel the result versus I'm not sure if I get the validation for my legacy. Maybe it's gonna happen after my death. It's clear that internal motivation is the driving factor and not legacy. This proves that at the best case scenario for our position, the benefits for like these huge people who can do amazing stuff are symmetrical. But we told you that it's significantly more likely that their incentives get perverted in the meantime, because they are, rather than doing the most good they can because they feel good doing good, they're going to go for things that spur their image, that gives them more outside validation from people, which overall decreases the amount of benefits we can actually get because people end up prioritizing their legacy. This is something that opposition never interacted with, super important. Now, before I move on to the second major point, I'm going to take CO's extension.
You need to understand that internal motivation is usually not enough, considering the kind of hardship that exists in society.
Okay, thank you. So I already gave two separate mechanisms on why internal motivation is more of a factor than legacy. Let's give a third one. I don't necessarily get the validation that I want when I'm acting based on my legacy. Like there's a certain level of uncertainty on whether or not people will validate me. Like if I go after internal motivation, I get that internal motivation directly when I get the result. But then I can't control how other people will react to me. Maybe they're going to be super upset about me doing something or just be very spiteful, and they're not going to give me the legacy and the validation that I feel I deserve. So it's a lot more uncertain. That's why it's not the driving factor for people. I'm glad we established that. Three separate mechanisms you have to answer. So it is clear that people have more of a perverse incentive on opposition side when it's perverted by legacy. So on the big impacts, we clearly win. Let's interact with the smaller ones, like on the individual ones. They tell us that I only want to feel pleasure and I'm super hedonistic on government side because I cannot have long-term goals, and that long-term goals are actually important. Look, on our side of the house, you can do the same, but the difference is that on an individual basis, the legacy part of it destroys other types of motivation and also make them significantly less pleasurable for you, so you live a worse life. Why? Because you put immense pressure and dissatisfaction on yourself based on something that you cannot control. Again, you don't know how people will remember you. You don't control the stories that people are going to tell about you, and that is something that can destroy the achievement itself and the benefits you get from the achievement itself, because you end up only valuing the thing if other people value it as well. That's why there's actually a trade-off between how much benefits you can get on an individual basis and the idea of legacy that ends up ruining it for the long run. But secondarily, on an individual basis, we think that at least on the individual who wants the legacy, they choose to go through this process, right? But the idea of legacy and this concept puts children, politicians, or successors of any kind to someone's legacy in a deadlock where they're subjected to upholding said legacy by the person who has authority over them. If it's a parent that wants their child to take the family business, they're going to force the child to take the family business regardless of what they want. If it's a politician that says, I'm going to support you, but I'm only going to support you if you do exactly what I say, then that again is like a successor and is being forced upon by the person who has the legacy. This is important because legacy makes people who want to be remembered take away agency from unwilling actors, which is a harm in itself that you should value on an individual basis. And there is also the additional harm of these people not being able to pursue their own things or do more good to society by being able to follow whatever the fuck they wanted to follow. Cool. I'm glad we established on an individual basis. Last point, whitewashing. My colleague talked about how Picasso is remembered and the people who he used to abuse aren't. This is extremely important and was largely unattacked. And also the legacy of this person needs to go unattacked, because otherwise it would feel kind of awkward to start studying him in art class if we know that he's a terrible human being who used to abuse people, right? That's why there's an active incentive for us to uphold the legacy of even terrible people, just because we want to have some role models or some people who weren't complete trash and actually did something. This is an automatic moral harm because we put them on a pedestal while they don't deserve it. And the people who were abused or who went through trauma because of them are disregarded because of this. But secondarily, there is also a harm of people taking over them as role models. So, OG.
I would like to thank the speaker very much for a speech, and now I'd like to invite the second speaker for the opposition.
Hello, I hope I'm audible and visible and all that. I've been having some connectivity issues today, so if at any point I become unconnected, please open up the mic and let me know. I will change the Wi-Fi. Also, please offer PRIs exclusively in the chat. I will take one around, 3, 5, stuff like that. Okay. So with your permission, panel, I begin in 3, 2, 1. Lots of external rebuttal. Then I'm going to talk about things that uniquely we get only with the force of legacy and impact on society. Okay, first they tell us about whitewashing, that we remember Picasso, but we don't remember the bad things we've done. How do they tell us this? By telling us about the bad things we have done. We think that there is nuance. If someone does good stuff and bad stuff, we can remember and have discussion around all of those stuff. For example, like, the Confederate soldiers statues in the US that are now talking about taking down because of slavery. People do have criticism and discussion. I think there is nuance. And I think the knowledge that I will be criticized in the future causes me, especially if I'm a leader and an important person, to be more careful in my activities. We don't get this whitewashing point and why it's unique to legacy. Okay. Second, it says I will try to leave legacy by doing bad stuff, like doing war crimes or forcing my child to take my family restaurant. I said in the same line. We think it's extremely, extremely unlikely. Why? Firstly, I know that if I do something bad, like force my child to do something or oppress other people, stuff like that, someone will go against me. The person who does not identify with my goal will probably not do such a good job. So it probably will ruin my legacy by not running the restaurant like I want, or by not implementing my policy in the right way, or by doing the good things. So this is the first thing. Secondly, we think if I will be taught, I will be taught as an example what not to do. Yes, my child will tell my grandchildren, "Oh, my parent forced me to take his place in the restaurant. It causes me all my life to be sad. I wanted to be a doctor, but he said no, you should go and run a restaurant." I know how life works, and I don't want to be remembered as someone who is oppressed and a bad person. We think people want to be seen as good people. We don't think it's very likely they will actively oppress people to leave some sort of legacy. We think also they know that other person will be affected by it. Yes, my competitors, the other people who are in society with me, and if I am seen as someone who is oppressed and puts myself in front of others, this is just a bad perception to be remembered by. We don't want to be remembered as bad people. Okay, the second thing that legacy is not what caused me to give charity. Just want to help people because I am a good person. So the only delta is by where do I give, and I give more smartly. We think it's completely untrue. Why do people give to charity? We think that people give to charity because they are inherently selfish, and everything we do to feel better with ourselves. They tell us the only mechanism is empathy. We don't think it is true. We think that the main reason I help people is I want to be acknowledged socially. I, for example, tell people about my stuff I do. I feel like my value, what it's about, my importance in the world is bigger. What is the delta of legacy? Because on both sides, as you can tell your friends, yeah. So legacy takes away the number of recognition I get and takes it by 1,000, 10,000, because the recognition is not only from my immediate circle or the newspaper, it's from everyone in the world forever. Bill Gates, who put the Gates Foundation, no, he gets not only such recognition, but he gets the legacy. He wants to be taught in the schools, and he wants to decide his future, not to be remembered only as computer guy, but to remember as a person who cured malaria, who cured Ebola, to be remembered and written in the books. This is what incentivizes people, and especially people with a lot of money, to invest 1,000 times more they do, because the contribution they get to their inherent self-value and the feeling they get and the knowing that they will live forever, they will not die when they die, because other people will talk about it, is so much harder. So we think we proved to you the delta very importantly on two levels. We think that proved to you the first thing, that good people, like actors who are empathy, let's say it's symmetrical, okay? Let's give it to OG. If I'm just a good person, I am good on both sides of the house. But people who are more selfish, which are majority of the humanity, people who have risen to the top of the capitalist society, people who have risen to the top and inherited money and accumulated a lot of values, their motivation to give stuff to humanity grows so much more on our side of the house, because the thing they get back is so much bigger, and because they have an inherent wish to be remembered and the agency to decide how they will be remembered. So this is the first way we prove to you delta by helping society. The second way we are going to prove to you delta is, let's talk about delta in the quality of my contribution. Before that, yeah, please, OG.
Have a child or be a politician mainly because of legacy, you'll be a horrible parent. In your best case scenario, legacy is one of the motivations. How do you justify the agency taken away by the people you used to achieve it?
Okay. We think that people who are bad do bad stuff and take away agency on both sides of the house. But we get agency in a unique way on our side of the house. How? Being dead, being deaf is the ultimate way of depriving my agency. I have absolutely no control about it. What will happen to me? The only thing I have agency in my life is how I will be remembered. The fact that I do have a legacy, I do have something to be remembered, gives me agency and gives each and every person agency. We think also that people affected by other people can have their own legacy and perceived agency from them, from believing they can leave some sort of legacy after them. And I understand how each and every person can leave a unique legacy for their children, for the stuff they do, the stuff they write, the stuff they talk about. So you think maybe we lose some autonomy on your side of the house, which is symmetrical, but because you are affected by people everywhere when you live, you cannot prove you are not affected by anyone. But on our side, you get unique contribution to your legacy. Okay, so what is the delta in quality? We think there are some stuff that only legacy inherently allows. What? Example, self-sacrifice. Self-sacrifice comes in a lot of ways. For example, when people in Russia fight against Putin, when Navalny says, I want to replace Putin, he knows he will see nothing of that in his lifetime. He will sit in Siberia, in war camp, and we will suffer. But he does it because he wants the legacy to be on as well to Russia. When I spent all of my life researching some fringe stuff in science, like quantum theory, when the likelihood I will see some scientific development is extremely slim, I still do it for the chance to leave a legacy, for the chance to leave someone and improve society. When people all of their life sacrifice themselves for the greater good by fighting oppression, by having social movement. When Martin Luther King fought and sat in the jail and did all of the stuff, and he knew the likelihood he will see complete equality in his lifetime is extremely slim, but he still did his legacy, did his sacrifice because he knows he will get legacy. We think this is the only mechanism which causes people and incentivizes them to do this self-sacrifice, which is extremely important because this is something that advances all of society and give benefits to each and every person who lives here and enjoys removing oppression societies and having unique developments. We think that it also gives you more satisfaction than hedonism. Why? Firstly, I can get hedonism by several ways, like from eating something flavorful or playing. The satisfaction I get from thinking about my legacy is unique, and it is the only way I can get this unique sense of autonomy. Secondly, it's much more deeper satisfaction. I do something that takes a long-term investment, and the satisfaction I get from my long-term investment, from my research, from the book I write, from the child I invest in, from my research, stays with me even in the hard times, even if when sometimes my life is not so easy, I can always remember that thing. Thirdly, this is the only thing which can mitigate the fear of the death, which is something that terrifies a lot of people and harms their everyday life. So because we think that for the self, it gives you unique benefits, and for society as a whole, also giving benefits, this is what I want.
I would like to thank you very much for your speech. And now to open our debate on the bottom half, I'd like to call upon the third speaker for the government.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, what the side of the both sides of the first side of the bench did wrong is focusing on the wrong thing in this debate. We're telling you that yes, maybe on both sides we can look, oh, who will be charitable, where will the humanity progress, who will do the good thing. We're telling you that maybe yes, on one side we can have people who are acting altruistically, on another side we can have people who are motivated by good, leaving a good legacy. But what we're telling you is that currently in this debate, this is not that comparative. We're telling you that on both sides, the humanity will probably progress. On both sides, we will have people that are doing the good deeds. But what we're telling you is the crucial part of this debate. What we will offer, like the first ones who will offer this in this debate, is how do people actually feel? Like how does an individual not navigate the society, and how does this affect somebody who is like an average Joe? Because we're telling you that legacy, living left behind, most people do not leave behind a legacy. We're telling you that the people who leave behind a legacy is like a top 1%, probably like the millionaires who can afford to donate a lot, probably like somebody who has like an amazing idea. And currently, yes, as far as humanity progresses more and more, there are less amazing ideas you can take for yourself. So we're telling you it's like a small percentage who will make like such a huge difference on society. So what we want to focus on as like the closing government, which nobody has till now, what are the intrinsic motivations and exactly how a person like an average Joe feels. So let's start with that, and I will compare that to all of their cases. So first of all, let's start with like why do humans have a desire to actually leave behind a legacy? So what happens? What are your motivations? We are telling you that people want to leave a legacy because first of all, two things. Firstly, they're afraid of death. If you do not have your answers of the eternal life, of if you do not believe in heaven, you're very scared that just by your life ending, that's it. And that scares people because you lived your whole life, and then it ending so abruptly is something that might scare you. Secondly, it's because you're trying to find another meaning in your life, because if you do not have a clear state of what your meaning is, maybe your meaning will be found by somebody else who will believe in your legacy or whatever. So these are like the two motivators. perpetrators. What do they do to a person? So now let's go into exactly how does a person feel in this society. So firstly, how does the society perpetuate these ideas of the actual legacy? We're telling you that it's perpetuated every day. It's perpetuated every day in a way that your parents force you. It will be in another extension about talking about children. But what's more is like even on social media, when there is like a post, oh, look, somebody competing in Eurovision is only 18 years old. What are you doing as an 18-year-old? Are you doing anything that is useful as that? Or for an example, look at this Olympian. He's only 18 years old, already winning a gold medal. What are you doing? Just sitting at home and playing games. And even if you didn't believe in the whole point of legacy till that point, you're going to be forced by society to believe in it, because that is something that society perpetuates. And it's something that will then sit in the back of your head, because it is something that is fed to you, for an example, in high school, people telling you, oh, will you be remembered? Will you have a rememberable career? Or will you, I don't know, have a good enough job to offer your kids a house, or whatever the side of the opposition said? So this is something that you're like, exactly as an individual, you are going to be forced into it, and you cannot opt out. This is something that we want to tell you. You cannot opt out in the society that expects you to have a legacy. Okay, now comparing that to opening opposition. Firstly, what they tell us is basically that when you do not have a legacy, you become depressed as an individual. We're telling you that the exact different thing happens. We're telling you that when you actually believe that your life should have a meaning, because everybody tells you your life should have a meaning, your life should leave behind a legacy, that is the moment in which you became depressed. Because if you do not see your life leaving a legacy, this is the moment where you get depressed. Oh my God, if I do not have a legacy, did my life even have meaning? Is my life even worth living? Secondly, we're telling you is that this is exactly what we're telling you. The problem with this, the exclusive problem, is that only a few people can actually live behind a legacy. This is the problem. You're constantly chasing something that you probably will not be able to chase upon. When at the end of your life, you will continue living your life chasing something that cannot be caught, because it is just unachievable. Because if living a normal life, like going to a normal university, having a normal job, yes, you may be remembered by your kids and grandkids, but we do not think that that is a strong legacy. We do not think that that is like a legacy that will fulfill your needful legacy enough. That is not a big enough legacy to, I don't know, your kids being sad when you die. That is not the legacy we think on our side. We're telling that in that moment, you're making your life decisions based on leaving a legacy. So for an example, you may not want to go and play a sport that is not famous. You will go and play a sport that is very famous, that can bring you fame, that can bring you legacy, because you're afraid of leaving your legacy. We're telling you that maybe you will choose a different school, you will choose a different career path, but most importantly, in your crucial points in life, in your most crucial, vulnerable points in life, you will choose decisions based on legacy. Why is this bad? We're telling you that this is bad because then you will live an unfulfilled life as a sad individual, because then you still cannot, because that is something that is you're going to just chase it, and seeing that you cannot chase it because you can see other people who are just telling about, saying stuff about legacy, like rich people having legacy, and you seeing that you cannot reach that, but society is still forcing you to do it. And before I move on, I will take a point from opening up.
We gave multiple reasons why everyone has access to a legacy, because people self-define it, because it is in their personal fields, it is in the values that they give their children, and in the memories that their community has of them.
Okay, thank you. But when you live in a society where you can see people having a huge legacy, for example, like nobody will fucking forget Jeff Bezos, in that moment, your legacy to you seems small. Just leaving a legacy behind your child, just remembering you, is not enough for you, because that cannot feed the whole expectation of the society. You will not be satisfied by that. And we're telling you now, moving on to our second extension, how you throw all the pressure to your children. Look, in the moment where you know that you cannot fulfill your legacy, we have told you why you cannot fulfill it, because only 1% does. We're telling you that in that moment, you're gonna infringe on the decisions of your children. And why is this important to us? Something that nobody has explained in this debate till now, is because this is how we perpetuate society. This is how we close the entire circle that we have been talking about, by moving it on to our children. What we're telling you here is that when you do not have when you have an unsuccessful legacy, which will prove to you why most people will have an unsuccessful one, in that moment, you want to transfer as much of the things like grabbing onto the last straw of hope into transferring it to your children. So you're going to make them, for an example, go and be a doctor, because you think maybe I didn't make it, but maybe my children will. And then I will be remembered as the one who forced them to do it. I will be remembered as the one who gave them the advice to do it. So you try to force your children into doing so. This also results into people who are insecure, people who are also buying into the whole concept of legacy, and people who are living their lives unfulfilled and not happy. So this is how we directly infringe onto children, and this is how we close the circle. This is why this is so important to us as a closing government. So what have I told you in this debate? We're telling you that currently the most important thing is most people cannot reach a legacy. You will not be satisfied in your life, and at the end of the day, you will have lived your life trying to chase something that is unchaseable, not deciding for yourself, but rather deciding based on that. And this is why we are so proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the speaker very much for this speech, and now I'd like to invite the third speaker for the opposition.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes.
All right, I'll be starting my speech soon. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, we think that oftentimes legacies are self-defined, which particularly means that your ability to create a legacy that is characteristic of who you are is oftentimes something that is of enough value for you. What this particularly means is that for individuals here today, even if they're able to win this particular debate, it will be something that will be good enough for them. And the fact that society expects them to create a particular legacy does not necessarily mean that we're looking out to create the next best technology. We often think that the ability to create something that will be used to remember who you are is oftentimes the most important thing in creating a legacy. What this particularly means is that it deals with the extension from closing government and saying that the society would definitely force you to create some form of a legacy. What we argue from closing opposition is that yes, we recognize that there might exist some form of social norms, but those particular social norms do not triumph the kinds of value that you would ascribe to the kinds of things that you would create, right? So yes, society would have some kind of value, but the most important value is oftentimes something that you yourself think is valuable for yourself, right? So to our extension, right? What is the nature of the human condition, right? As closing government rightly points out, oftentimes the ways in which we come to this was based on the idea that we do not have any form of consent. Our agencies are extremely limited, i.e. the idea of the lottery of birth. Secondly, the way in which the world is that oftentimes there's a lot of suffering that is going on in the world. So things like sicknesses, things like wars, things like you not having enough money to be able to live a meaningful life. What this particularly means that we live our whole lives trying to make meaning out of our lives because we want to make sure that our lives is not something that is just as random as the next thing. The reason why this is extremely important is because given the nature of the world, individuals have an incentive to want to live a lethargic world or to want to live a lethargic life. That's to say, a life that is not characteristic of importance or value, because oftentimes they would feel that there's nothing that they can actually create given the nature of the world. Notice that human agency, in spite of all of these particular problems, is extremely limited, right? So the fact that you look at yourself and you recognize all the big problems in the world means that as an individual, oftentimes you think that your ability to self-express yourself and to be able to make meaning in life is something that is extremely limited. What this particularly means is that at the end of the day, the most important thing for human survival and the human condition is a world that makes the human race and the human condition much, much better, because the world in which we live in is one that's extremely, extremely cruel. Why is this something that's an important extension? There are two reasons. Firstly, because it is principally consistent with human nature and human evolution. The reason why we are much better than people that lived in the 18th century is because of the incentive to want to make things better, i.e. the incentive to want to leave a legacy and to want to be a part of the world such that it is remembered, right? I.e. the idea that you shouldn't be something that is just as random as the next best thing. But secondly, the reason why this is an important extension is because it makes our extension much, much superior to what open opposition has told you, right? So even though open opposition rightly points out that it makes individuals much more incentivized to do good things, what they fail to argue is why without this particular incentive, individuals would have an incentive to want to live a much far worse of life. We are telling you that individuals or this particular incentive to want to live a life that is static and that is not characteristic of innovation is more likely to happen without the incentive than the human desire to want to live a legacy, because of how the world makes us think that we in ourselves as human beings have a limited agency and there's nothing that we can actually do on our own. The next extension is on the retrospective nature of the desire to leave a legacy. There are two things here. Firstly, it means that oftentimes it creates an incentive to want to break the convention. If you come into a world where there's a lot of things that are agreed and assumed to be good, what this particular desire for a legacy means that it wants you, or it incentivizes you to question these things and to question a world where we can go beyond these things or we can break these particular conventions. The reason why this is extremely important is because it deals with what open opposition talks about in terms of how it makes individuals incentivized to want to change, to want to create better things in the world, like things like innovation, etc., etc. Without the added fact that the desire to create a legacy is oftentimes looked back in terms of the individuals that would look at the thing that you have left behind is extremely important. Because at the end of the day, a legacy is not something that will be determined or be assessed or valued per the people in the status quo, but the people who come after you, right? But secondly, the nature of the introspective nature of the desire to leave a legacy is that it oftentimes attaches responsibility and carefulness to the individuals that are creating these particular legacies. That's to say, the fact that oftentimes these particular legacies will be attached to you means that as an individual, you would have an incentive to want to look at the consequences and, more importantly, the intent of these particular actions. That's to say, even if you create the next best thing, you'll be much more concerned about the means to creating these particular things. What this looks like, for example, the idea that individuals will be able to respect other individuals and treat human beings as ends in themselves and not necessarily as means to an end. The reason why this is extremely important is because oftentimes the desire to want to create a legacy would mean that it overshadows your capacity to think about the consequences of your own action. The fact that at the end of the day, people will be assessing the value of your own legacy means that at the end of the day, it creates an incentive to want to be responsible and careful for the kinds of things you're going to do. Why is this extremely important? Firstly, if you take a look at minorities, for example, the way in which these particular minorities are brought up in the world is that they constantly feel things like oppression and suffering. What this particular idea of a desire to cause change or a desire to leave a legacy means that you incentivize minorities and you tell them that in spite of the problems that they are facing in the world, there's a chance for them to make the world a better place and to make a world that is much, much better for the generations to come that are suffering from the things that they are suffering in. The nature of the suffering that these individuals go through is so overwhelming that they need something that tells them that do not give them. This is something that's extremely important. On an individualistic level, right, this is extremely important, given that it means that it reduces the ability for people to do things like believe in things like nihilism or go through depression, because at the end of the day, you know that there's a unique ability for you to create change in the world. Next, I'll take a point from opening governments.
The access to the fulfillment of legacy is dependent on if you have privilege and access to resources. This makes our point on big legacies and taking away agency from vulnerable people the most important, because they achieve it and harms the ones that don't, which is the focus of your extension. Interact, please.
You don't think this is true? Some of the most important philosophers in the world were people who are not necessarily rich, right? But more importantly, we've already told you how oftentimes the value of these particular legacies is dependent on the individual that is creating this particular legacy. So the society is telling you that it is important to create a legacy. The kinds of legacy that you create is something that is left up to you. Nextly, on the third extension we have, right, this particular desire to create a legacy means that we oftentimes highlight the importance of our past and the information that we can learn from our past. The reason why this is extremely important is because human innovation is not necessarily built on the incentive to want to create change, but the ability to recognize what happened in the past and how to make the things that happened in the past much, much better. This is extremely important. Firstly, because it's in line with human evolution, right? The fact that human beings are going to continuously evolve is something that is an important principle within this particular debate. If you have a world or a group of individuals or a species that is not incentivized to want to evolve, we think that the ability to want to leave a legacy means that it creates a narrative that we always have to look back to the society and look back to the past and see how we can make the society much, much better. That's to say, how we can learn from the people in the past and how we can learn from the force of the past. For all of those reasons, vote closing opposition.
I would like to thank the speaker very much for his speech. And now would like to call upon the last speaker for the government.
Okay, sorry, just a second to set up my timer. In the meanwhile, I'd like my points to be through chat. I'll be probably taking one around 5, just take a quick cup of water. Okay, great. So I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think CO does a terrible mistake by only doing a one-liner to rebut our whole extension. What do they say? Oh, you get to pick your own legacy and what you want your legacy to be. We think this is not really the case. Let me give you an example. For example, Annika and I could have gone to the novice break and pretty much be in the final, but we simply didn't feel that this is something that was okay to do. We felt that we should have gone to the higher final and that we should debate here. We believe that it would have been easier. I could have studied for my exam. We would be finished with this whole tournament a lot sooner, and it would probably be beneficial for me in the short term. But we believe that our intrinsic values that are set up by both society, by our parents, dictated us to do so. And Tin would probably have killed us if we had done that, and he probably wouldn't have given us this scarf. So we believe that we don't choose what our legacy or what we want to do is the thing that happens, meaning that closing's opposition one-liner really fails at the very start. Furthermore, Lanika gives you that analysis. So what do they bring in their case? Firstly, they tell you this is pretty much the ability to self-express and to make things better. Note, this answer already exists within our own case and through the whole narrative. The goal isn't to do the best thing. The goal is to do the thing that is going to be perceived in the future as the best, meaning you're not going to do everything detail by detail. You're going to try to build a picture that is wide, meaning this is something that really isn't new and has already been rebutted. But furthermore, they tell you, okay, because this is of retrospective nature, this is a question of innovation and so on. I believe this is once again redundant, but we believe that most of these things like pursuing science, pursuing debate and so on is from intrinsic motivation that is not necessarily by legacy. I've been talking with people and arguing with people my whole life, meaning I've pretty much enjoyed it, and just as so, I'm enjoying debating now. This consequence of me being in a final isn't necessarily a product of me wanting to be remembered by that. Furthermore, we believe that most people aren't innovators, meaning most people don't even have the access to the benefits, or rather the things to do so. We believe that most people that already have the capability to do such things or already exist in the world within their own intrinsic motivation, meaning this is something not exclusive. But furthermore, they lastly say, okay, this is important because we're going to learn through our history. I think this is a non-point because simply like learning about your history, if it can help you in the status quo, is a thing in and of itself. Like having legacy doesn't mean history is going to stop being recorded and so on. What's the final weighing with CEO? We believe that pretty much their whole case is redundant and is applicable to a small number of cases where our own extension actually covers each and every individual. Moving on to our own extension, we tell you firstly as a premise that most people don't really have the access to have a worthy legacy. Why is that? Because it is defined by the perceptions of others. How others perceive is something that we have done worthy. Furthermore, the very fact that the only thing or the only people we've been talking about, like Nikola Tesla, Bezos, and so on, are people are from the like 0.001% is exactly that point. We're not going to remember each and every individual, and not everyone is going to perceive our legacy as something good, meaning we're going to pretty much always pursue a goal that really isn't something that is reachable. Furthermore, desire in and of itself, and note this is an exclusive analysis, is something pretty painful. Why? Because when you can't fulfill your desire, for example, hunger, sex, and so on, you feel frustrated, you feel angry at yourself, you pretty much reach a point where you just think, okay, maybe I'm not going to pursue this anymore, I'm not going to pursue sex, or you simply try to do anything to reach that goal. For example, in hunger, I'm going to break in a store, I'm going to eat the shittiest food, I'm going to break my diet. This is the emotions that like desire actually causes. So why is this pressure so enormous? It is because legacies are compared to other larger legacies. We believe that no individual can ever be satisfied. Note, this happens at the certain point where you're in your life and thinking, okay, have I done everything that is most worthy? Because death is always so frightening. You're never going to feel like you did the whole thing you should have done. For example, I could have been first in that fucking second round, but fucking shit, they robbed me and so on, and I'm not going to be happy at that point, meaning I'm not going to feel satisfied, and I'm going to think, okay, what's happening? This is an endless hunger, this desire that we need to get rid of as side government. We believe that at this point we're likely to either surrender to the pressure, meaning that we're simply going to resign and just say, okay, we can't do this, this is something I can't reach, and pretty much be depressed and having like pretty much a sad. But furthermore, we tell you the more likely scenario is that we're going to portray this on children. Yes, opening government does mention children, but I don't believe they actually impact them. They say, oh, you're going to have to take your father's firm. We tell you this is not the whole analysis here. We tell you that the analysis that this is a perpetuating effect of me not achieving what I wanted to do, and because my children are the closest one to me that I can shape the most, the people that share the same genes, I'm going to reflect on them. I'm going to pretty much do anything I can to make them do what I couldn't have done. But the probability is that they can do the same thing as well, meaning that these children are going to pretty much give up as well. Just another example, for example, if I'm the best fucking figure skater in the world, nobody respects figure skating, and that's why I'm probably going to try to pursue football, or I'm going to be or do anything else that is actually going to give me money. Because of all of these reasons, our extension is most important. But before moving on, I'll take opening.
Sorry, yes. Even if in the short term, this final is difficult for you, in the long term, you will remember the moment as positive and get deeper satisfaction than you would from momentary passing pleasure. Striving for legacy leads to living a deeper, more conscious, and more fulfilling life.
Okay, this firstly takes the premise that pretty much shaping your legacy is a step-by-step thing. We think this is something that you do build maybe gradually in reality, but you don't perceive it at that. We tell you that there is a certain point of your life when you lose a final, when you pretty much get divorced or so on, that you're going to reflect on your life. And that's the exact point you're going to feel these emotions. These emotions aren't like omnipresent within every decision. We believe that these emotions that pretty much opening opposition comparatively like describes, like I want to make a step-by-step effort to make my life more worthy and like more desirable and to build my legacy is more likely on our side. Why? Because you're not going to perceive your life as a whole and how other people are going to view it, but as the things that I can achieve now that are going to make me feel good. Even though it's figure skating, even though so I'm going to do that. Maybe I'm not going to be the most famous sport person in the world, but I'm going to be successful and I'm going to love what I do. I believe that's the actual comparative. And because of all of these reasons, Zagreb takes this final as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.
I'd like to thank speaker very much for a speech, and I would like to invite the last speaker for the opposition.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, there's a tint in my, like there's a small line in my camera. Not sure what happened. Anyway, I'm going to start my speech shortly. First, international ESL Finals, so happy to be here. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, OG starts this particular debate discussing how inspiration and motivation is important, and the source of our inspiration and our motivation is equally important. So they say that you do things because you care and not because people care in their world. What they are saying is internal inspiration or internal motivation is enough. In most instances, that is not true. Here's why. One, we live in a world where there are so many inequalities, like the lottery of birth, privilege, and oppression, which means that in most instances, people have to search beyond what is within to find a reason to take particular actions. What this means is that living for yourself alone is usually not enough of a reason for you to make like very important changes, right? And notice how we need people to make some very, very important sacrifices, and we need people to take very important decisions, because that is the only way we are able to preserve ourselves as human beings, and that's the only way we are able to evolve as a species. Notice how Mohammed Bouazizi set himself on fire to start the Arab Spring, not just for himself, but for all the people in his particular like region who needed some sort of help, who needed some sort of support, and needed some sort of change. In this particular debate, OG's world does not have a situation where the Arab Spring starts, or a lot of important actions which are selfless happen, because in most instances, they are saying care about yourself and don't care about the society around you. That in itself is very problematic, because the society around you directly impacts you as an individual, and your ability to change very important things in society goes a long way to ensure that you as an individual is well taken care of. These large impact actions are essential and important for our very existence, right? So for instance, if no one volunteers to go to Mars first, we are probably never going to find out if Mars is a good alternative for us in an instance where the Earth shatters. But also importantly, notice how this is much more important for minorities, because at the end of the day, minorities are under oppression. They need to ensure that they succeed, but this success is much difficult because of a couple of reasons. One, social perspective and narrative is against them. Two, opportunities do not exist or are fewer in most instances, and there's a ceiling on the potential of their ability to self-actualize, which means that there are a lot of structural issues that make it much more difficult for them to improve or to make their lives better. What you get in our world is that there's a larger than life goal, there's a larger than life reason and motivation for these particular individuals to take an action, because then they would be remembered as the first Black person to take a particular action, or as the first Black person to do something, right? But on the individual level, notice how an individual who is the first ever individual in his entire Black family to make it to the university has a bigger incentive to, for instance, complete university and become the very first person in his family to be able to complete his education, which is inherently a legacy for his family. That is something that you don't get in government world, right? But then let's get to CG's case. CG's case looks so beautiful, and they say, oh, all we have for them is one-liner responses. I'm going to show you that we have so many more responses, right? First off, they say, oh, social pressure. Social pressure is not a huge thing in this particular debate because there are other things that force people to conform, and it's not just the desire to leave a legacy, right? But then also notice how we did not invent things like jealousy, which are already social, human desires that cause people to conform socially or force people to do things that other people are doing. But also notice how the example that it gives is largely not relevant. And notice how in most instances, society putting pressure on people is not always a bad thing because society pressures people to do what is good by creating laws, for instance, and creating legal frameworks that punish people for doing things that are bad or things that are evil. Social pressure inherently may not be a bad thing, and they don't prove how legacies themselves are a bad thing, especially when these legacies are things that will benefit society, whether the individual likes it or not. That in itself means that social pressure is not negative. Moving on to other important things, right? So they say that, oh, few people can achieve a legacy, so society should stop like forcing people to achieve a legacy, right? First off, as I've already explained, society does not usually force people. It's a human desire that is inherent in all of us because we have seen a lot of people have legacies. But even in instances where people are being forced to create a legacy, if these legacies are largely good, that in itself is not bad. But secondly, right, you don't really explain to us why this is a zero-sum game in most instances. Because, for instance, today being like Sunday here in Ghana, there are over so many things happening in the country or so many things happening in the world. About 100 people can all achieve new records, can all achieve legacies today, which means that legacies can happen in various ways for various people, provided they're able to like find an instance where there's a legacy for them to achieve. So you can't just say that, oh, a lot of people can't achieve legacies, because in most instances, legacies can be personal, and these legacies are things that people can achieve in most instances. I'll take a PY from OG.
For average or disadvantaged people, higher hanging fruit is unachievable or unlikely, thus they settle for achievable small legacies because of fear. Rich people have access to privilege and higher stakes. This is an inherently discriminatory.
You see, your world does not give an out to people who are in a minority, because if you say that the world is already rigged against them, then what is the need for them to do anything else besides the fact that there's a legacy that they will leave behind and their name would live in perpetuity, and people that will come after them will constantly continue to remember that it was Elisha that was the first person to do this for the black race, or it was Fatal that was the first person to do this for the black race. Like in your world, there's absolutely no incentive, because as you're saying, the world is already rigged against them. Panel, also notice how competition in itself is not a bad thing, especially when it creates the ability for us to constantly continue to evolve as a society and create innovation that are important to our existence as human beings. Panel, also notice how at the end of this debate, we bring you the most important arguments in this debate. What do we bring you? One, we tell you that human evolution in itself is something that we need to preserve. And for human evolution to be preserved, people need to find a way to live forever. The only way you can live forever, considering the biological limitations that we have in society, is for you to leave a legacy that allows your ideology to thrive on and allows your ideology to live forever. Also notice how we also tell you that in status quo, legacy is usually a retrospective thing, right? So you're going to have an instance where in most instances, people are doing things that consider a large number of people, because if you do something that hurts a particular group, in the longest run, this particular group would go a long way to cancel you. So notice how like particular statues have been torn down in particular parts of the world because of the fact that these particular individuals did things that were inherently bad. So legacies are not going to stand for bad people, because society will judge them based on the values that society agrees with at the particular instance where that particular legacy is being judged. At the end of the day, the world is cruel, and as individuals, we need to find a way to be able to achieve things, and legacies allow us to do that. Thank you.